Every drop matters. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and soft sunlight slowly entered the room, filling the house with warmth and calmness. Everything felt peaceful, just like any other day, but something was missing. When I walked into the kitchen, I stopped for a moment. The water container was completely empty. Not a single drop was left. This had become normal now. Every few days, we had to buy drinking water. I picked up the empty can and stepped outside. It was around 10 in the morning, and the sun was already bright. As I walked toward the market, I noticed many people like me, carrying empty containers, waiting to fill them. Water, something that was once freely available, had now become something we had to buy. After finishing my routine, I returned home carrying a heavy water can. As I entered the courtyard, I heard the sound of water flowing continuously. I turned and saw my son playing happily near the tap. The tap was fully open, and water was flowing freely onto the ground. He was laughing, enjoying himself, completely unaware. For a moment, I stood there silently, watching him. His innocence reminded me of my own childhood. I gently asked him, "Why are you wasting water?" He looked at me and replied innocently, "I'm not wasting it, Papa. I'm just playing." His words were simple, but they struck me deeply. I sat beside him and said, "Do you know, some people stand in long lines every day just to fill one bucket of water? In many villages, women and children walk miles under the hot sun carrying heavy pots just to bring water home. In some cities, taps run dry for days, and people have to buy every drop. There are places where rivers have completely dried up." He became silent, and the sound of flowing water suddenly felt louder. I slowly stood up, walked to the tap, and closed it. Then I looked at him and said softly, "Let me tell you a story from my childhood." It was the year 1985, and I was just 9 years old, living in a small village. Life was simple, and my parents were farmers. Water was everywhere: tube wells, ponds, and flowing sources. We never thought it could end. I used to play with water every day, letting it flow freely, wasting it without thinking. One day, an old man came to me while I was playing near a tube well. He watched me for a while and then said gently, "Son, don't waste water. It is precious." I laughed and replied, "Water is everywhere. It will never finish. Why should I worry?" I ignored him and continued playing. The old man looked at me calmly and said, "One day, you will understand when water becomes rare." Then he slowly walked away. At that time, I didn't take his words seriously. Years passed, and I grew older. When I turned 20, everything began to change. The village was no longer the same. The fields that were once green and full of life had become dry and cracked. Farming was no longer possible because there was not enough water. I still remember my father standing in the middle of the field, looking at the dry land in silence. There was nothing to grow, nothing to harvest. That evening, he sat quietly at home, saying nothing, while my mother tried to hide her tears. It was a moment I had never seen before, and it changed something inside me. Slowly, the situation became worse. Wells started drying up, and water sources became unreliable. Families in our village began to leave one by one. Houses that were once full of life became empty. Friends I grew up with disappeared. They moved to cities, not to follow dreams, but to survive. They worked small jobs, earning just enough to live, leaving behind their land, their homes, and their memories. It was then that I remembered the old man's words, "One day, you will understand." And finally, I did. I thought about my childhood, the water I had wasted, the warning I had ignored, and for the first time, I felt deep regret. What felt like a small mistake had become a big problem, not just for me, but for everyone. It returned to the present and looked at my son. "That old man was right," I said softly. "I didn't understand then, but today I do. Water is life, and it is limited. Every drop matters." My son looked at the ground and then at his wet hands. This time, there was no smile on his face, only understanding. Slowly, he walked toward the tap and closed it tightly. I placed my hand on his shoulder and smiled gently, because the lesson had finally reached the next generation. Then I said to both my children, saving water is not difficult, but it needs awareness. Always close the tap when you are not using it. Do not let water run while brushing or washing. Use only as much water as you need. Try to reuse water whenever possible, like using leftover water for plants. Fix leaking taps immediately, because even a small leak can waste a lot of water over time. And most importantly, never think that water is unlimited. Respect every drop. Looked at them and added softly, "If we all start saving water today, we can protect our future. Because every drop we save today is life for tomorrow." Save water. Save life.